hard talk there because Hillary Clinton is about to speak for the first time since collapsing in New York. Let's cross to Greensboro now in North Carolina to hear what she's got to say.
Thank you. Thank you all. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here at UNC Greensboro. I want to thank Martha for that wonderful introduction. It means so much to have her here, along with her wonderful daughter, Sarah, and her mother, Barbara. And the story she told is really one that motivates me every day because it is kids like Sarah that led me to politics in the first place, to try to make our country and our world better for them. So to see Sarah grown up and thriving is very special, and your whole family's support really means the world to me. Thank you, Martha, Sarah, Barbara. I have to say it's great to be back on the campaign trail. As you may know, I recently had a cough that turned out to be pneumonia. I tried to power through it, but even I had to admit that maybe a few days of rest would do me good. And I'm not great at taking it easy even under ordinary circumstances, but with just 2 months to go until Election Day, sitting at home was pretty much the last place I wanted to be. But it turns out having a few days to myself was actually a gift. I talked with some old friends. I spent time with our very sweet dogs. I did some thinking. You know, the campaign trail doesn't really encourage reflection. And it's important to sit with your thoughts every now and then. And that did help me reconnect with what this whole campaign is about. People like me, we're lucky. When I'm under the weather, I just want to have a conversation, and other people can wave their arms and their signs, but I want you to think with me for a minute about how I certainly feel lucky. When I'm under the weather, I can afford to take a few days off. Millions of Americans can't. They either go to work sick or they lose a paycheck, don't they? Lots of Americans still don't even have insurance, or they do, but it's too expensive for them to actually use. So they toss back some Tylenols, they chug orange juice, and they hope that the cough or the virus goes away on its own. Lots of working parents can't afford child care, which in many states costs as much as college tuition. So for millions of moms and dads, if they get sick, there's no backup. They're on their own, aren't they? That's a story for too many people still in America. When illness strikes or an accident happens, you feel you're on your own. If you lose your job or can't afford college, you're on your own. If your aging parent starts needing more help and you don't know what to do, you're on your own. Life events like these are catastrophic for some families, but mere bumps in the road for others. I have met so many people living on a razor's edge, one illness away from losing their job, one paycheck away from losing their home. And that goes against everything we stand for as Americans, because some things should not come down to luck. Some things should be within reach for everyone, no matter what. Like financial security, like affordable health care, like the peace of mind that comes with knowing that if something goes wrong, your family will be okay. And above all, the knowledge that no matter what, your president is fighting for you and will always have your back. That right there, that's why I got into this race. I am running for everyone working hard to support their families. Everyone who's been knocked down but gets back up. The factory workers on their feet all day and the nurses looking after patients all night. I'm running for young people like so many of you here who dream of changing our world for the better, and for all the parents and grandparents supporting those dreams by dedicating every dollar they can spare to your education. I'm running for the LGBT teenager here in North Carolina who sees your governor sign a bill legalizing discrimination and suddenly feels like a second-class citizen. And if anyone wonders what the costs of discrimination are, just ask the people and businesses of North Carolina. Look at what's happening with the NCAA and the ACC. This is where bigotry leads, and we can't afford it, not here, not anywhere else in America. I'm running for women like Janelle Turner. Back in May of last year, Janelle was diagnosed with breast cancer. She went through nearly 6 months of very tough treatments. Last October, she brought her 8-year-old daughter to one of our rallies in Iowa, and they made a huge sign that read, 13th chemo yesterday, 3 more, hear me roar. Wouldn't you want to meet the woman behind that sign? Well, I sure did. So we got talking and we stayed in touch. She keeps promising me she'll see me at the inauguration, and I tell her I'll keep working to get there, but she'd better be there too. I'm running for her and all the mothers and fathers trying to get and stay healthy so they can be there for their kids. But perhaps most of all, I'm running for those kids. Standing up for children has been the work of my life. As a lawyer with the Children's Defense Fund, as First Lady in Arkansas, in the White House, as a senator, I have fought for kids housed in adult jails, kids who've been neglected and abused, kids who couldn't get health insurance because of pre-existing conditions, kids with disabilities so they could go to school. You heard today from someone I've known for a long time, now grown up and a lovely young woman, Anastasia Somoza. I learned from my family and my Methodist faith that we are each called to do all the good we can for all the people we can, for however long we can. And to me, that means making sure all our children have the chance to live up to their God-given potentials. So when I meet a little girl in Nevada, terrified that her parents are going to be deported, it hits me right in the gut. When I meet a little boy in Flint, Michigan, who can't drink the water at home or in school because it's poisoned with lead, that gets me going. All I want to do is get to work, making things better for them. That's why I care so much about national security, too. I want to give our kids a safer world. To me, that means a world with strong allies, more friends, fewer enemies, and fewer nuclear weapons. It also means leading the fight against climate change so we can leave our kids a healthy planet. My opponent in this race disagrees with me on every one of these fronts. Just a few days ago, he said that if another country's troops taunted ours, not fired at them, but taunted them, just taunts, he would respond by blowing them out of the water. He would start a war over that. That is just one more reason, my friends, why the stakes in this election are as high as any in our lifetimes. You know, I've been involved in politics in one way or another for many years. It is not an easy business. It can get rough, and I've built up some defenses. When it comes to public service, I'm better at the service part than the public part. But this is why I do it, and this is who I'm in it for, to make life better for children and families. And that's what this race has always been about for me. Well, now we're in the final stretch. There are just 54 days till Election Day, just 54 days till the most consequential vote of our lifetime. And just a little more than a month until early voting starts here in North Carolina. Let's make these days count, particularly here, because you know what your governor and legislature tried to do. Make it harder for young people to vote, harder for people of color, harder for people with disabilities, harder for the elderly. There can't be any more motivation than that to make sure every young person, every person of color, every person with a disability, every older person turns out and votes. So in these final days, let's try to tune out all the chatter and the nonstop analysis that doesn't often have much to do with what the next president has to do to create good jobs, to create opportunity, to make it possible for every young person to afford to go to college or get the skills that you need for the jobs of the future. Let's talk about what really matters. And here's my promise to you. I'm going to close my campaign the way I began my career and the way I will serve as your president should you give me that great honor. Focused on opportunities for kids and fairness for families. Next week, I'll go to Philadelphia to talk about challenges facing our young people. In Florida, to focus on building an economy that welcomes everyone's contributions, including people with disabilities. Then I'll be back here in North Carolina to meet with more working families. From now until November 8th, everywhere I go, I'm going to talk about my ideas for our country. You know, my campaign has rolled out detailed plans in 38 different policy areas. Yes, somebody actually counted. Everything from reining in Wall Street to creating good-paying jobs to fighting Alzheimer's, supporting people with autism. You see, I have this old-fashioned notion that if you're running for president, you should say what you plan to do, how you're going to get it done, and how you're going to pay for it. 'Cause, 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 You can read it all on my website, HillaryClinton.com. We even put it in a new book called, you guessed it, Stronger Together. Get a copy of it because it tells you everything Tim Kaine and I intend to do. Now, like a lot of women, I have a tendency to over-prepare. I sweat the details, whether we're talking about the exact level of lead in the water in Flint, or how many North Carolina kids are in early enrichment programs, or the precise interest rate on your student loans, right down to the decimal. Because you know what? It's not a detail if it's your kid. It's not a detail if it's your family. It's a big deal. And it should be a big deal to your president. Now, I confess, I'll never be the showman my opponent is, and that's okay with me. Just look at the show he put on with Dr. Oz today. But I am going to deliver for you and your family just like I did for Sarah all those years ago with the Children's Health Insurance Program that gave her the chance to be the extraordinary young woman she is. And I'll tell you something else. People accuse me of all kinds of things. You probably have seen that. But nobody ever accuses me of quitting. And I will never give up. I'll never walk away, no matter how tough the going gets. I'm actually asking Americans to hold me accountable for my ideas and hold my opponent accountable for his. We don't need a president who says the minimum wage is too high. We need a president who knows that Americans deserve a raise to get to a living wage. We don't need a president who wants to take away people's health coverage. We need a president who wants everyone to have quality, affordable health care. And we don't need a president who apparently thinks only married people deserve paid leave and only mothers ever stay home with the kids. We don't need someone who rushes out a half-baked plan just weeks before an election after decades of ignoring or putting down working moms. We need a president who has spent years fighting for these issues, who has a plan to support all families in all their various shapes. Ask yourself which candidate you can count on to be on your side. Respect your family. Stand up and fight for you and your kids. That is who you should vote for on November 8th, because as Michelle Obama said in her fabulous speech at the Democratic convention, when we go to the polls this November, the real choice isn't between Democrat or Republican. It's about who will have the power to shape our children for the next 4 years of their lives. It's also about the kind of country we want to be and what we want to leave behind for future generations. People have to decide, are we going to make our economy work for everyone or just those at the top? Are we going to bring people together or pit Americans against each other and rip our country apart? Are we going to work with our allies to keep us safe? Or are we going to put a loose cannon in charge who would risk everything generations of Americans have worked so hard to build? Now, I have a lot of confidence in the American people and in our country. My opponent keeps running us down, saying we're weak, a disaster, an embarrassment. Every time he says things like that, I think about Janelle and her strength in the face of cancer, or Martha and Sarah in the face of their health challenges, and that little boy in Flint who gets up every day and goes to school even though he can't drink the water. See, my opponent has America all wrong. There's nothing we can't do when we come together as one nation, set big goals, and pursue them. And the American dream is big enough for everyone to share in its promise. So if you believe the minimum wage should be a living wage, that no one who works full-time should have to raise their child in poverty, join us. If you believe that every man, woman, and child in America has the right to affordable health care, and women should be free to make our own health decisions, join us. If you believe your working mother, wife, sister, or daughter deserves equal pay, then join us. Get involved these last 55 days. Go to HillaryClinton.com or text JOIN, J-O-I-N, to 47246. We need volunteers right here in North Carolina. We can't do this without you. And remember, the presidential race isn't the only one this fall. We've got a lot of important statewide races. Let's come together and send Deborah Ross to represent the people in the Senate. Starting on October 20th, you can register and vote early at the same time at any one-stop early voting site in your county. So the heat is on. Spread the word. Tell your friends, your family, your neighbors. If you share our vision for America's future, come be part of helping us shape it. We do not have a minute to lose. We have so many blessings. Now it's our job to deliver on those and to make sure every
You're watching Outside Source on BBC News. We are bringing you Hillary Clinton's speech live from Greensboro, North Carolina, as she returns to the campaign trail.
American dream now and way into the future. Let that be our message. Let that be our mission. Please come out and help us fight. Fight for you, fight for our children, fight for our families. Let's make America all that it should be. Thank you, and God bless you.
Well, there we are. Hillary Clinton very much back on the campaign trail. She knew that this speech was going to be under so much scrutiny as she returned after 4 days of absence from that trail after nearly collapsing at that 9/11 memorial event on Sunday. So much speculation about her health, and she had to come out, show that she was capable of continuing the campaign, capable of potentially being a future president, and silence her critics. And that speech, about 20 minutes or so, very much seeming to be well again. Let's go over to Catty in Washington. Catty has been watching and listening in. Catty, I mean, first of all, she knew this. She had to give perhaps the speech of her campaign so far.
Well, she certainly had to look and sound well, didn't she? And you can see her in the crowd there. I mean, she's very well groomed. She's well made up. But despite that, I think she managed to give across the impression of somebody who was recovering. She handled it very well at the top of the speech, and I thought that will have solicited quite a lot of sympathy for her, actually, the way she spoke about her pneumonia and how frustrating it had been for her to sit at home. She talked about spending time with her sweet dogs. I think every dog lover in the country will have liked that. And she also talked about how lucky it made her feel having that time of reflection to realize that she was able to take time off a few days from work because she'd been sick, And so many millions of Americans, as she put it, couldn't do that because either they don't have healthcare insurance, or the healthcare insurance is too expensive for them, or they're worried that they'll get fired if they stay home when they're sick. So she kind of brought in her personal story into her bigger political campaign ambitions of trying to convince American voters that she understands their plight, the plight of the middle class here, and that she will work for them.
How much do you think the Clinton campaign have learned over the last few days about transparency, about giving out more information?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I was thinking just before this speech, this would have been such a good moment for Hillary Clinton to come out, you know, as an advocate of full disclosure. To perhaps on the plane on the way down to North Carolina, she could have released all of her medical records, for example, to show that she realizes that transparency is an issue. She has, whatever it is, less than 2 months to go now between now and the election. And one of her biggest electoral stumbling blocks is that people don't trust her. They don't think that she is transparent. They think that something sort of hidden is going on in her agenda, that she's too much of a control freak, that she's too prone to secrecy. Well, wouldn't this have been a great day to come out and say, look, I handled that badly. I should have told everyone straight away that I had pneumonia. Here is everything about my medical records, every doctor's seal of approval that you might ever want, every doctor's exam you might ever want. And I think that would have been a real turning point for her, because transparency is a problem. They haven't done that. They didn't go on the plane and say, here are all of my medical records. And she actually referred in that speech to Donald Trump, the showman, as she called him, going on television here and producing what most medical critics here have described as very thin medical records, not substantial. And I think she could have used this to advantage. But I think this is so deep-seated in Hillary Clinton's psyche, this need for privacy and control and an element of secrecy, that it's almost impossible for her to make that shift.
Kathy, you mentioned there Donald Trump going on this particular talk show, Dr. Oz. Let's just bring you a little of what he said on that sofa.
You're 6'3", 236 pounds, as I mentioned. In my mind, I'm thinking your body surface area and your BMI is high. It's probably close to 30, which is sort of the barrier for most people. Yeah. Do your doctors or your family ever give you a hard time about your weight?
Yeah, I think I could lose a little weight. I've always been a little bit this way. You know, I've sort of always been that. I was probably a good swimmer, but I've always been this way. I think that, if I had one thing, I'd like to lose weight. It's tough because of the way I live. But the one thing I would like to do is be able to drop 15, 20 pounds. It would be good.
Kathy, do you think that appearance has got the sort of reaction that the Trump campaign had hoped for?
I don't think anyone thinks that these are complete medical records. There were a couple of pages there of letters from his doctor, and generally speaking, medical records are kind of big fat documents with pages of every blood test that you've had and every possible illness you may or may not have ever even thought of having. So this was fairly thin. It was great television. He said, shall I release them? Shall I show you my medical records? And of course then the host, Dr. Oz, said yes, and he went ahead. So he's showed himself the master of television. The weight issue, obviously obesity is a problem in America. I don't think that many people will lose sympathy for him over that. It did show that he's on lowering cholesterol drugs as well. That was the other detail that came out. But there was nothing there, I think, that was staggering. I would say that it was a fairly, electorally, politically, it was fairly neutral, that performance.
And after this very strange few days, Kathy, where are we with the campaigns? These polls are so tight, aren't they?
Well, the polls are tightening, and that's what's interesting. It's not really where polls are at any one point in time that we should look at, it's which way they're moving. And the fact that we've had a series of polls this week showing Donald Trump both nationally and in a few of the critical battleground states, notably Ohio and Florida, gaining and in some cases overtaking Hillary Clinton, ahead of Hillary Clinton, that's bad news for the Clinton campaign. The momentum of the polls appears at the moment to be in Donald Trump's favor. Now, Hillary Clinton's had a bad couple of weeks between the emails and her health issues, and Donald Trump is sticking to auto cue better when he's giving speeches. He's more contained. He hasn't said anything massively controversial in the last couple of weeks, and I think we're seeing that play out in these numbers.
Catty, thanks very much. Catty Kay in Washington. Let's turn to events in Syria. Aid is still not reaching the places it's most needed. That's despite the US and Russia extending the truce which began on Monday evening. Take a look at this. A UN aid official in Turkey has told the BBC a convoy of 20 trucks is still waiting for clearance to get into the besieged city of Aleppo. This is where hundreds of thousands of people have been under siege for months. The eastern half of the city is held by rebel forces and the west by the government. There are mixed reports that both sides have begun withdrawing from an access highway, Castello Road, so that it can be used as a supply route for residents. Well, the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has been speaking to the BBC about what is holding up the vital delivery of UN aid. He was talking to the BBC's Laura Trevelyan.
All the trucks, all the humanitarian workers are ready to move. They are waiting at the borderline. But unfortunately, shelling began. And even though we have received the full guarantee and assurances from Syrian government and the Syrian armed groups, the trucks are not able to move.
Secretary General, who is doing the shelling?
It's not clear. I wanted to confirm it's not clear who is shelling. So whoever may be, I'm urging them again to stop as soon as possible. When there is a ceasefire, this ceasefire should be kept and fully implemented so that during which time the United Nations humanitarian agencies can really deliver. They're desperately trying to reach besieged areas and hard-to-reach areas.
Ban Ki-moon. Well, the BBC's Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen is still in Aleppo. As we've heard, aid still not getting in, but Jeremy's been to meet some who already established they're helping the local population. Here is Jeremy's latest report.
This is what cooking for 10,000 people looks like. This kitchen, which is boiling hot and a hive of activity, is part of an operation organised by a Catholic charity called the Jesuit Refugee Services. It's given to some of the neediest people here in government-controlled West Aleppo, but it's quite clear that the needs here in the West are nothing like as serious in the rebel-held sector in the East. What they'll do is put all this into containers and take it out to feeding centres. Over on the east side, the other side of the front line, food prices are 300% higher. That's because of a deliberate siege by the government, putting pressure on the population and on the rebel fighting groups. The east is the side that really needs the humanitarian aid. If the ceasefire can't deliver that, I think it's in real trouble. It's one of the major reasons why rebels who don't like the agreement much have adhered to it, I think, is the fact that some humanitarian aid might come in. If that doesn't happen, they might say, what is the point of continuing with all of this? Now the UN, charities, NGOs would like to set up similar operations to this on the other side of the front line in rebel-held East Aleppo, but that's easier said than done, because the reason why they are so short of food over there at the moment is because of a deliberate tactic used by the Syrian government. They have besieged the area and they have deliberately squeezed the population to put pressure on the people and on the armed rebel groups who are there. And it's a tactic it's an ancient tactic, and it's one that works. Elsewhere in Syria, groups of rebels have surrendered after years of all of that, and that's, I think, what they've been trying to do in East Aleppo. So getting humanitarian aid in is not just a question of needs. It's a question of politics as well.
Jeremy Bowen. Now, earlier this week, we brought you news of a leak of details from high-profile athletes' medical files. Now a fresh batch of information, and there could be more. The World Anti-Doping Agency tweeted this, that WADA has confirmed an attack by a Russian cyber espionage group. So this was how WADA responded to that latest round of leaks. WADA has no doubt that these ongoing attacks are being carried out in retaliation against the agency because of our investigations that expose state-sponsored doping in Russia. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks outlined exactly how many athletes were involved in the hack.
29 in total, 8 different countries, and it's included Sir Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome, of course, big British stars. We've also heard from the Czech tennis player Petra Kvitova. So a lot of this is around the leaks of TUEs. Now that is a difficult thing to get your head around, but it's a therapeutic use exemption. Essentially, substances that are normally banned, but the doctor has given them special dispensation to use it for an existing medical condition. And that's the key thing here. These athletes have done nothing wrong.
Right, so the difference between what certain Russian athletes were accused of, the taking of substances for them, and this is that this was fully transparent and authorised by the authorities.
Absolutely, and there is a really strict process in place now for TUEs because in the past it has been abused, and that's where the grey areas come up. We've heard of athletes in the past like Lance Armstrong, for example, using TUEs to cover up actual doping. This time, nowadays, it's actually quite difficult to get a TUE, so it is for a genuine medical reason.
And what have the athletes, these particular athletes, said about these revelations?
I think there's been a bit of a so what attitude from them, and rightly so, because they haven't done anything wrong. For example, Chris Froome, it was a steroid called Prodnazole that he's taken. He released a statement today saying, let's have a look, I've openly discussed my TUEs with the media. I've no issues with the leak, which only confirms my statements. In 9 years as a professional, I've twice required a TUE for exacerbated asthma. The last time was in 2014. And we heard from a spokesman for Petra Kvitova as well, the tennis player, and he said to say that Petra Kvitova suffers from asthma and uses medication for treatment is the same revelation as saying she's won Wimbledon. So essentially they're saying this is all out there, there's nothing wrong here.
And the people behind the leaking of this information, it's thought to be Russian hackers, but we don't know for sure if there's any connection between them and the Russian state.
Well, the Kremlin, of course, have absolutely denied any involvement. They've even gone as far as saying, well, look, we'll help WADA. If they come to us, if they need any help, we'll lend them a hand. We're good at this. We're good at exposing hackers. I'm not sure WADA will really take them up on that offer. But WADA now saying this is a criminal activity. They've involved the police. They're going to get to the bottom of it. Today, Team GB has actually said to all its athletes, look, you could be at risk here. There's more to come. And this hacking group, Fancy Bears, has said they're going to keep going, and there's going to be more to this story.
Natalie Perks. Still to come on Outside Source as Russia approaches parliamentary elections this weekend. The BBC has been to find some of President Putin's biggest fans. Here in the UK, the Bank of England says the short-term economic impact of Brexit isn't as bad as first feared. It's predicting growth for the third quarter of this year will be higher than expected. Our business editor Kamal Ahmed explains why the bank is being more optimistic.
Strong employment figures, we've had strong retail sales figures, people are going out and spending whilst the sun is shining, we've had strong figures on housing, and I think what's happened is that there have been some significant changes since the referendum vote which have supported the economy. I think the key one was the Bank of England cutting interest rates. It cut interest rates after the referendum to 0.25%, which meant that lots of people's mortgages came down in cost. Of course, we haven't actually left the European Union yet. So what's interesting is, of course, sterling has gone down in value, and so our exports have actually become cheaper going abroad.
This is Outside Source, live from the BBC Newsroom with me, Cara Giannoni. Our top story, Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail. She's made her first public appearance in North Carolina since falling ill at a 9/11 memorial on the weekend. Other stories being reported on around the BBC right now. Emergency services in China's southeastern province of Fujian are clearing debris in the aftermath of Typhoon Miranti, which made landfall overnight. It's the most powerful storm to hit this part of China since 1949. That's on BBC Chinese. An explosion on board a tourist boat off the Indonesian island of Bali has killed 2 people and injured at least 13 others. Police investigators haven't yet determined the cause, but say initial indications point to an accident. That's from the BBC's Indonesian service. China has launched a second experimental space station, the Tiangong-2, blasted off from the Gobi Desert in northwestern China. Next month, 2 astronauts will go to the station to carry out research. China is aiming to have a manned station by 2022. That's on BBC Online. Time for business on Outside Source. Donald Trump has been at the New York Economic Club, hoping to win over top players on Wall Street with his plan to boost economic growth. He said his policies would lead to a 4% growth in the US economy. That's something the country hasn't seen in over a decade. He said his plan to reduce government regulation and taxes would help the millions of Americans that he says have been left on the sidelines. Let's just bring you a little of what he said.
My plan will embrace the truth that people flourish under a minimum government burden and will tap into the incredible unrealized potential of our workers and their dreams. Right now, 92 million Americans are on the sideline outside of the workforce, and they're not a part of our economy. It's a silent nation of jobless Americans.
Well, Samira Hussain was at that presentation. Let's talk to her now. Samira, how did the speech go down in the room?
Well, there were certainly elements of the speech that the audience really appreciated. Now, this is the New York Economic Club, and it's really made up of businessmen and really prominent people in the financial community. So, obviously, when he talked about cutting the corporate tax rate, which hovers around the 30% mark down to 15%, well, that came with a lot of cheers, as did his comments with regards to trying to cut down on regulation and trying to make it easier for people to do business, and of course cutting the kind of difficulties that arise when filing your taxes, that there's a lot of loopholes, and that he wants to try and make that all run a lot more smoothly. That said, things that that Wall Street might not like is the increasing protectionism kind of rhetoric, and some of the comments that he's made against global trade agreements.
And his economic ambitions, I mean, do the figures add up?
Yeah, you know, that's always a conversation here. You know, no matter whom you speak to, or no matter which candidate you're speaking about, there is no candidate that is going to be able to put the plan as is through Congress. That's just not the way it actually works here. So it is perhaps possible that if the plan that's presented by Mr. Trump could potentially, perhaps, maybe result in 4% growth rate, it would never actually become a reality as is, because just not the nature of which the way politics here in the United States work.
Samira, thanks very much. Samira Hussain in New York. Now, after a decade of delays, finally the British government's given the go-ahead for a new nuclear power station. It's the UK's first for more than 20 years. Now it's going to be on the Somerset coast in the west of England. Let's show you exactly where it is. We can go in closer. An expansion on the existing Hinkley Point project that's already there. It's going to be built by the French energy company EDF, but a third of the cost will be put up by China. Here's our business correspondent John Moylan.
It's a project on a huge scale. The new nuclear plant at Hinkley Point, with its twin reactors, will provide 7% of the UK's electricity for 60 years. The construction will cost around £18 billion and create 26,000 jobs.
Secretary Dr. Greg Clark.
But it's been on hold for weeks as the government carried out a last-minute review. Today, the business secretary confirmed that Hinkley would go ahead and there would be new safeguards for future plants.
This will allow the UK government to take a fair and consistent approach to the national security implications of critical infrastructure, including nuclear energy, in the future. These changes mean that while the UK will remain one of the most open economies in the world, the public can be confident that foreign direct investment works always in the country's best interests.
The French energy giant EDF agreed to fund the project back in July. But amid concerns over the role of EDF's Chinese partners, who want to bring their own reactor technology to Britain, the government launched a review. Today it announced new safeguards which would prevent the sale of EDF's controlling stake during the construction phase without prior agreement. The government will also take a special share in all future nuclear plants, allowing control over how stakes in the projects are sold. And it will review the Enterprise Act to ensure proper scrutiny of foreign ownership of our critical infrastructure. But today EDF welcomed the news.
First of all, I would like to say very clearly how delighted I am that the government has taken this decision. It's great news for the customers, it's a big boost for the UK industry, it's a great step in the fight against climate change.
But some say Hinkley may never be built. Similar reactors here in northern France and in Finland are years behind schedule and billions over budget. And rivals warn that consumers will pay the price, as EDF will receive a guaranteed amount for the power that Hinkley will generate, which is more than twice the recent wholesale level. And critics say there's other ways to keep the lights on in the future, that the UK should be backing more renewables like wind power rather than outdated technology from the past.
Well, what we really need to be doing right now is investing in the renewables, in wind, which is already available, offshore wind, cheaper than Hinkley will be. We need to invest in solar so that people can have this on the roofs of their houses, put that together with batteries, and they could be getting revenues as well as bills.
The government's intervention may have raised eyebrows with investors worldwide, but this green light for Hinkley will provide a huge boost to the economy of southwest England, and it means Britain is entering a new nuclear era. John Moylan, BBC News.
Well, we started the programme with Hillary Clinton. Let's return to that story. She has returned to the campaign trail, the first time since falling ill with pneumonia last week. Let's bring you a little of what she said when she took the stage.
As you may know, I recently had a cough that turned out to be pneumonia. I tried to power through it, but even I had to admit that maybe a few days of rest would do me good. And I'm not great at taking it easy even under ordinary circumstances, but with just 2 months to go until Election Day, sitting at home was pretty much the last place I wanted to be. But it turns out having a few days to myself was actually a gift. I talked with some old friends. I spent time with our very sweet dogs. I did some thinking. You know, the campaign trail doesn't really encourage reflection. And it's important to sit with your thoughts every now and then. And that did help me reconnect with what this whole campaign is about.
Hillary Clinton speaking a short while ago in North Carolina, fully back on the campaign trail, she tells us. Lots more to come in the next edition of Outside Source. The weather's coming next. Stay with us.
Good evening. This week has already brought us the most powerful typhoon of the season so far across the West Pacific, hitting Taiwan or close to Taiwan and into the southeast of China. And we have another one hot on its heels. This next typhoon is also aiming towards Taiwan, but to the northeast rather than the southwest, as this previous one is still meandering around across eastern China. So flooding and rains are the main concern here for the coming few days, because it's a fairly slow-moving feature through Friday and into Saturday, affecting very highly populated areas such as Shanghai. And then it doesn't stop there. It's likely to cross to Korea and potentially affect some parts of southern Japan, still recovering, of course, after that major earthquake. Now, hot on its heels, as I say, we've got another typhoon, and this time, instead of heading through the Luzon Strait and into the southwest of Taiwan, it's expected to brush the northeast. So still some really powerful destructive winds, coastal storm surge and flooding rays, and it may well itself head into the southeast of China following on from that as well. So plenty to keep our eye on here. We've got an enhancement in the monsoons as well, up towards parts of Konkan, Goa, up towards Mumbai, the Western Ghats. The remnants of a low pressure here feeding heavy rain, and we've had some really vigorous showers further east as well in the last couple of days. And these are scenes from Storm Julia. Now, she's been downgraded to a depression. She's affecting the southeast of the United States, but you can see for yourself here there's some fairly rough conditions out at sea. Now, Julia is tending to weaken, but nevertheless, she's been meandering around the coast of Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and she's still going to hang around for a little while yet. So that poses the risk of further storm surge, some really rough seas, and some further rainfall for coastal counties here. It's quite wet in southern states too, and these showers and thunderstorms are expected to be severe across parts of the plains as they move out towards the Great Lakes. The potential even that there could be the odd tornado. Behind it, it freshens up quite significantly. And further west, where it is drier, we are expecting rainfall for the weekend and a big dip in our temperatures. May even see some snowfall on the tops of the mountains. Further east, we see that those showers making their way towards the likes of New York, and it stays showery in Miami throughout the weekend. So that's this particular low pressure system, those storms heading their way eastwards. There's the remnants of Storm Julia. She's still hanging around even into Saturday and to Sunday. Behind it, a real dip in the temperatures, and it'll be feeling quite chilly in comparison. Now into Europe, this low pressure's given some wet and windy conditions for western parts of France, northern parts of Spain, and some big storms are forecast through the Alps and into Italy. And of course those big storms are also forecast with warnings out for them here in the UK, but John will have more on that in the next half an hour.
Tomorrow we'll speak to Asha Bosley, Bollywood legend, the world's most recorded singing star and inspiration for the hit track A Brimful of Asha. Join us tomorrow at 9 o'clock, BBC Two, the news channel and online.
We've a spell of funshine heading our way, with hot new comedies and fresh twists on cool classics.
Mr. Humphreys, are you free?
I'm free. This is not squalor, this is genteel poverty.
I will have you, Fletcher. I'm not as daft as I look, am I?
I tell you, Liz, if it was men doing the feeding, there'd be blokes all over this cafe with their breasts out.
That's great, Dad! Don't move!
Ah! Not my birthday. It's gonna be. You're having a wash. What are you laughing at?
Sitcom season across the BBC.
Hello, I'm Cara Ginoni. This is Outside Source. Let's look through some of the main stories here in the BBC newsroom. Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail. She's made her first public appearance in North Carolina since falling ill at a 9/11 memorial on the weekend. The Philippine Senate is told that President Duterte once shot a government agent. He's denied the allegation. It comes after criticism of his backing for extrajudicial killing. And as Russia approaches parliamentary elections this weekend, we find out why it's still the president who's gaining support. On Outside Source Sport, we're going to have the All-Ireland Gaelic football final, but even bigger than the match, we'll talk about the 65-year-old curse on one of the clubs. Well, a story we touched on there in the headlines. In the Philippines, the country's Senate has been hearing testimony that President Rodrigo Duterte ordered the killings of about 1,000 criminals and political rivals over a 25-year period. The claim came from a former hitman who insisted to senators that his testimony was accurate and wasn't politically motivated. Rights groups have long accused President Duterte of involvement in death squads. This is a part of that testimony.
They have been ordering us to kill. We don't even know the names of the victims. They just call us and ask us to kill someone. My conscience has been bugging me. There are a lot of killings in Davao. We pushed this one guy into the water, where he was eaten by a crocodile. People were killed like chickens in Davao City. They were being killed for no reason. I'm not destroying the credibility of President Duterte. I'm just telling the truth of what he asked me to do.
Our BBC Asia Pacific editor Michael Bristow told me more.
Extraordinary testimony. You've heard some of it there. Essentially, 1,000 people over a 20-odd year period whilst Rodrigo Duterte was the mayor of Davao. This is a city in the south of the Philippines. He went to Davao and he promised to clean up crime. It was a crime-ridden place, and he did just that. And essentially, that's what he's done afterwards since he's become president. He made the exact same promises. The person who we've just heard from there in the Senate, he spoke about how he personally killed 50 people, fed one to the crocodiles, other people were dumped at sea. Really extraordinary testimony.
Did he say much more about why he had chosen to come out with all this at this point?
Well, he's speaking now because there's a Senate inquiry into Rodrigo Duterte's current campaign to rid the whole country of crime. 3,000 or so suspected drug dealers have been killed in shootouts with the police and vigilantes. And essentially the Senate is looking into this, so this is part of this testimony. We also heard as well, though, this man seems to have something of a conscience, you know, killed all these people. He wants to speak out and explain exactly what happened.
Have we had any direct response from the President himself?
Not from the President himself, but his spokesman has said there's nothing in these allegations. They've been investigated before, nothing's come of them. A government minister has said that they're all lies and fabrications, but I would expect the President at some point will have to come out and make quite a strong statement himself, because, as you said, they are very extraordinary allegations.
And part of President Duterte's appeal to the voters was people who wanted to see a no-nonsense approach to crime. But one wonders, is this an approach too far? Is this a step too far? Will this affect his popularity?
Well, perhaps not. I mean, people voted him into office as the president, knowing full well his reputation in Davao. The death toll has continued to rise over the past weeks, and still his popularity remains high. So perhaps these revelations, shocking as they are, won't really affect his popularity in the Philippines. Michael Bristow.
Far-right extremists have clashed with asylum seekers in the town of Bautzen in eastern Germany. Let's show you where it is. It's earlier this year. People cheered as fire burnt down migrant housing. It's also very close to Dresden, where the anti-Islamization movement Pegida began. And last night, some 80 men and women fought with 20 migrants and refugees. The migrants fled to a hostel, which was then placed under guard by the police. Now, there are differing reports about how that fight broke out. The last time Russians voted for a new parliament in 2011, claims of ballot rigging caused mass street protests. Since then, the jailing of activists and tougher laws against demonstrations has taken the wind out of the protest movement. The annexation of Crimea brought a new wave of patriotism and support for the authorities. On the eve of Sunday's parliamentary election, there's widespread apathy among the electorate. So, a quarter of a century after the collapse of the Soviet Union, are Russians losing interest in democracy? Steve Rosenberg reports.
We're on a journey to a remote part of Russia, speeding along the northern Dvina River. On board are election officials and a ballot box. We land on a tiny island. It doesn't have a polling station, but then there are only 3 registered voters living here. So it's off to find a place where the islanders can vote early in Russia's parliamentary election. With a few tweaks, a village kitchen becomes a voting centre. After casting her vote, 84-year-old Zenaida Matveyevna settles down for a nice chat about her cabbage patch. Zenaida has 2 loves in her life, her flowers and her president. It's Vladimir Putin's party she voted for. When Putin raised my pension, I cried with joy, she tells me. And what does Zenaida think of democracy? I don't know what that is, she says. I ask the same question here in the city of Arkhangelsk and receive so many different answers. Democracy is when there is order and security and no litter, she tells me. It's some kind of struggle for something, she says. I don't know what. But to these Russians, democracy was all about free and fair elections. In Arkhangelsk and across Russia, there were unprecedented anti-government street protests, sparked by vote rigging in the last parliamentary election.
Here, people came.
Among the protesters here was Alexander Felt. The opposition movement, he says, has faded, and with it, hopes for democratic change.
Most of the people, they don't think about democracy in their usual life. They go to for fishing, for their gardens. They are thinking about their children, their families, and they don't want to oppose the authorities.
Crucially, most Russians still trust Vladimir Putin far more than their parliament.
The Kremlin rules Russia through a power vertical, with Vladimir Putin at the top and all other institutions, including the parliament, below him and subservient to him. But with economic problems rising, the danger for the Kremlin is that if people start to doubt the legitimacy of those other institutions, they'll pin all their hopes on the one man at the top.
At Buryonka farm on the edge of Arkhangelsk, there are as many cows as there are Russian MPs. But it's in Putin they trust here. Our people can ask Putin directly for help, she says. He solves many problems like this. Back on the river, the ballot box is heading off to another island. But Russians aren't expecting a new parliament to make their lives better. They think they've got a president for that. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Arkhangelsk.
Now for a sport we've never really discussed on Outside Source, Gaelic football, massive in Ireland. This weekend we'll see the All-Ireland final as Dublin take on underdogs Mayo for the Sam Maguire Cup. The performance of Mayo will be under the spotlight, and that's because there's the belief that a curse has been put on them since last time they won the final in 1951. Confused? Well, we were too. So let's turn to Conor McNamara in the BBC Sports Centre, who can tell us a little bit more with a bit of authority. Conor, good to have you on the programme. Tell us first of all about this supposed curse.
Well, you've got to go back to 1951 when Mayo last won the All-Ireland final. Winning the All-Ireland's a big, big deal in Ireland. It's sort of the equivalent of winning the Premier League in England and the FA Cup all rolled in together. These guys are amateur players. They don't get paid. There's no transfer fees. You're representing the county you were born in. It's very much the chance to become a local hero. Back in 1951, they won the All-Ireland final. It was played in Dublin. They travelled immediately home to their home county in the west of Ireland, Mayo. And as they were travelling through a town on the way home, they actually got caught up in a funeral procession. Now, funerals in Ireland, I mean, even now, but particularly back in the 1950s, entire towns will come to a standstill. People will walk slowly through the town behind a coffin or a funeral cortege. But in their speed to get home, so legend has it, the Mayo players were making a bit of noise. They moved quickly through the town. They didn't respect the funeral. And the priest who was in charge of the funeral said, right, there is now going to be a curse on Mayo Gaelic footballers that while any of this team who've just won the All-Ireland final, while they are alive, that team will never win again. And it's now 65 years and they haven't managed to do it.
Have they come close over the years at all?
And this is it, they really have. They've been to the final no fewer than 7 times. Once it went to a replay. In one game in 1996 against Meath, there was this freakish winning point right at the end, which had people really feeling superstitious about things. And now that they've come against a very fancy Dublin team who are the reigning champions, people are just wondering, is this going to be the chance to end this curse? In terms of the living members of the 1951 squad, up until February there were 3, and then a priest, actually, funny enough, Father Peter Quinn, he passed away. He was well into his 90s, leaving just 2 surviving members. And the people of Mayo would love for them in their lifetimes to see a Mayo celebration, and if nothing else, to stamp out this curse.
Now, you could get an attendance of something like 83,000. This is obviously a huge sport.
It's a massive sport in Ireland. I mean, if you look at the big stadiums in Europe, you've got the Nou Camp in Barcelona is the biggest sporting stadium, Wembley in London is the second biggest, and Croke Park in Dublin is the third biggest stadium. And it's the biggest stadium that doesn't hold football on a regular occasion, soccer, if you will. Also, you put in that it's a horseshoe stadium. It's built sort of the same shape as a baseball ground. So you've got three enormous sides and then one open side. It's a fantastic atmosphere in there. I mentioned how the players are amateur, they don't get paid. It's all about the pride in your county. And entire towns will be taken over. They will paint their houses in the colours of the team. They will run bunting through the streets. And it is a massive pride if you can come home as winners of the All-Ireland and win the Cup, the Sam Maguire.
And particularly for Mayo, after 65 years of this supposed curse, Conor, what would it mean for people there?
Mayo is very much a rural county. It's the west of Ireland. Huge amounts of emigration over the years. People will move to Dublin, they'll move to London, they'll move to the United States. Even the team themselves have got to separate into two squads for training because so many of the players have had to leave the county to find work there in Dublin. So they'll have a training session in Dublin, then other guys will have a training session back in Mayo. And you know, for so many people, you meet them here in England, they'll say, oh, when I was a kid in our summer holidays, we used to go home to Mayo. It's a place people have got a huge affinity with. And this is the thing. They are good at Gaelic football. They've got to the final these 7 times since 1951, but they've just not been able to get over the line. And people will say, you know, Dublin are a very good team. They'll say Mayo don't have a prayer. They actually mean that there's a superstition here, that maybe they don't have a chance, maybe they are cursed.
We will be fascinated to know how it turns out in the end. Conor, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
There at the BBC Sports Centre. We'll keep you posted. Still to come on Outside Source, the death of this young Chinese actress from cancer has triggered debate on social media because initially she chose traditional Chinese medicine over chemotherapy. Here in the UK, a documentary film about the Beatles premieres in London tonight. The Beatles, 8 days a week, the touring years, tells the story of the Fab Four's rise from playing small shows at the Cavern Club in Liverpool to sell-out tours of America. Celebrities, including Madonna, attended, as did John Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, and Olivia Harrison, widow of George. Our entertainment correspondent, Lisa Mazimba, caught up with some special guests at the premiere.
Joining us on the carpet now are Ringo Starr and Sir Paul McCartney. First of all, this documentary, how strong were the emotions and memories that it brought back for you?
Well, we'll find out tonight. We saw a rough cut and that brought back several memories of Hollywood Bowl footage, and but I haven't seen the finished product, so I believe there's a lot more stuff in it.
And we're getting great memories, obviously, of playing with John and George. So that's very emotional and very special, you know, to see that again. And there's some great things that we'd kind of half forgotten, like we refused to play a show in Jacksonville in the south of America because we heard it was segregated and blacks on one side and whites on the other. And we said, well, that's stupid, so we won't play it. We didn't, and they had to change the rules. So it was the first integrated show that Jacksonville had. So, you know, looking back now, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Very proud of it.
What does it mean to you to see all these people out here for a Beatles premiere after all these years, the continuing impact that the band has?
It's only going to last for 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Top whack.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, people love the Beatles, and we happen to be 2 of them, and here we are.
Of course, you finished with that final performance on top of the Apple building. At the time, you didn't know that was going to be your final live performance. I mean, what's it like looking back at that footage? What are your memories of that time?
Well, that time was great, but it wasn't like the final gig. We thought we'd done the final gig, and that's why life is always open. And then we went on the roof and we played live, which we love to do.
Well, it was great, you know, it was a lovely concert. Looking back on it, you know, we were enjoying playing. And we had a very good drummer. Yeah, so, I mean, it was a great little band. And the memories are just of that. For us, you know, as musicians, we had 2 great guys to play with. And it made for a great little band.
And then there was us.
This is Outside Source, live from the BBC Newsroom. I'm Karen Giannoni. Our top story, Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail. She has made her first public appearance in North Carolina since falling ill at a 9/11 memorial event on the weekend. Now, on Friday, there is a major gathering of the European Union in the Slovak capital, Bratislava. The goal is to shape a vision of what the EU can be after Britain's vote to leave. Let's try and show you. Where are we going? There we are. Ros Atkins is there. He's been looking at what we can expect from the summit.
This informal EU summit is going to take place in Bratislava Castle. The UK is not on the guest list, but the other 27 members are. And for Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, this is an opportunity to bring back political control, to show the world a display of post-Brexit unity. And he's focused on 3 issues to do that. It's accepted that Brexit was, in part, an expression of profound disquiet about immigration. And while the EU's members are not about to compromise on freedom of movement, they do accept they need a better system for dealing with the huge influx of migrants and refugees. The problem is they don't agree on what that system should be. Expect more pressure on Hungary, Slovakia and others to accept the proposed migrant quotas. The attacks in Paris, Brussels and Nice ended any discussions about whether the EU needs to do more to protect its citizens. Expect more commitments to better cooperation between members and better controls on external borders. Also, Jean-Claude Juncker is going to be pushing his idea for a new EU military headquarters. More than ever, the EU needs to show that it improves the finances of its members and its citizens. If you look at the economic problems of Spain, Portugal or Greece, you understand that the EU's economy is still struggling to recover. Expect more detailed plans designed to deliver stability and growth. Here in Bratislava, all of the flags of the European Union are flying, apart from the Union Jack. Now, of course, Brexit is going to be discussed, but we're in this strange situation where everyone knows the UK's leaving, but it hasn't formally told the EU, nor has it defined what it wants this new relationship to be. So when senior EU figures say that right now there's not much to be done on the detail of Brexit, in large part, they mean it. One last thing. The EU's 2 big powers, France and Germany, have elections next year. And both Angela Merkel and François Hollande are under significant political pressure at home. See everything they do in Bratislava in the context of that. As ever with the European Union, for the people walking the red carpet, it's all about balancing personal, national and European interests.
So, as you have seen, Ros will be live in Bratislava tomorrow covering that summit. There will be special editions of Outside Source on our usual time slot, 17 GMT and 20 GMT, that's 9 p.m. if you're watching in the UK. Now, there's intense debate in China after a 26-year-old actress died from cancer. Su Ting refused chemotherapy, saying she preferred traditional Chinese medicine. Now a lot of people are wondering if that's why she died. She documented her journey online. Here's some of the pictures she posted of herself undergoing some traditional Chinese medicine treatments. You can even see cupping there. We saw a lot of that during the Olympics recently. It attracted the attention of tens of thousands of social media users, some of them critical of the therapy she'd chosen. One commented, listen to me, Chinese medicine is absolutely useless to cure cancer. If you don't want to listen to me, at least listen to a doctor. Another, please abandon the traditional treatments. It's a fantasy. You need to rely on modern medicine to save yourself. Helia Chung from BBC Asia Online gave me more about the story.
Back in July, she announced that she'd been diagnosed with lymphoma, but she said she was really reluctant to take chemotherapy. And there were a number of reasons for that. She said she'd seen her friends suffer under chemotherapy. She was worried about suffering, and she was worried about how it would affect her looks. She was worried it wouldn't work, and she was worried about the cost. So for all those reasons, she decided to go for traditional Chinese medicine instead, techniques like acupuncture, cupping and bloodletting. Unfortunately, her situation got worse, and by late August, she actually did begin chemotherapy. But perhaps it came too late, because sadly, she died on the 7th of September.
So this all happened very quickly. She was only diagnosed in July. And this question of taking Chinese medicine, traditional medicine, how attached are Chinese to their more traditional remedies?
It's a really big thing in China. In fact, a lot of my friends go for remedies like acupuncture as well, because Chinese medicine goes back, the theories go back thousands of years, and there are universities offering degrees in Chinese medicine as well, so it's considered quite well established. Critics, though, say that the benefits haven't really been scientifically proven and more research is needed, but a lot of people do support it, and not just people in China. Olympic athletes like Michael Phelps have been known to use techniques like cupping, and supporters feel it's less intrusive, it's more holistic, and they argue there are fewer side effects. Having said that, I don't personally know anyone who think it would be a good cure for cancer, and that's really where a lot of the debate has been online.
And the debate has been pretty frenetic. This has really got a lot of people talking.
Yes, and the debate started when Su Ting announced that she had cancer. A lot of her fans were already urging her, please take chemotherapy, that's going to work, not Chinese medicine. And after her death, there was another big debate as well. Lots of people have been criticizing Chinese medicine, arguing, does it work? But supporters of Chinese medicine have been fighting back as well. Some of them argued, well, you know, many cancer patients may have chemotherapy and then sadly die, but that doesn't mean Western medicine is a sham.
Helia Chung. Now it's nearly time for London Fashion Week, and although the clothes might be new, the conversations aren't. This year there's a push for designers to make 2 different sizes of their clothes and show them both on the runway. Here's Caroline Davies.
The lights, the glamour and the cheekbones. But the catwalk has its politics. The debate on the size of models still hasn't been resolved. Rosie's been campaigning for better healthcare for models for nearly a year. When she arrived in London, an agency told her to lose weight.
I lost about 10 pounds and a few inches around my hips. I went back to see the same agency and they said, we just need you to keep losing weight, we want you down to the bone. So my initial reaction was that I couldn't lose any more weight. I'd already been starving myself for about 4 months, and I didn't want to believe that they'd said that to me, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else as well.
But outside the fashion world, could things be changing? Social media is full of images celebrating different body shapes. The UK plus-size market is on the rise. According to some fashion publications, it could be worth as much as £6.4 billion in 2019. Jada is a plus-size model.
A lot of the plus-size modelling industry has grown dramatically in the last 5 years. It's one of the most, lucrative markets at the moment, with the most potential.
But creating bigger sizes isn't just a business opportunity. According to some, the fashion industry's small sizes are causing a health problem. The Women's Equality Party want designers to show 2 sizes in every range, one of which must be at least size 12.
We need to be bringing attention to the fact that the fashion industry pins the success of its industry on tiny, tiny little sample sizes that women, normal-sized women, can only fit into after weeks and weeks of sustained malnutrition. It is not healthy, and it's not healthy for the industry either.
The British Fashion Council, based here in Somerset House, say they take the issue of body image very seriously. They support campaigns that promote a positive body image, and they don't let under-16s walk on the catwalk. They say they're looking forward to speaking to the Women's Equality Party about how they might work together in the future.
Fashion may have many changing faces, but in the future, will these be some of them? Caroline Davis, BBC London News.
Lots more on all our stories on the BBC website. Just another reminder that Roz will be back on Friday tomorrow with a special edition of Outside Source from Bratislava.